So are there options for Parliament or the public to challenge a no-deal Brexit? Providing some insight into the unfolding events, I am now joined by Kevin Matthews, the Assistant Professor of History at George Mason University. Kevin, thanks very much for coming in.
Glad to be here.
Before we get to options or possible options, I want to ask you, what do you make of Boris Johnson's recent pledge to really speed up the negotiations? How will that impact all this?
It seems to me that it's just another one of his ploys to make it look as if there's real action taking place when in fact the EU has already said they're not going to change the withdrawal agreement, so what is there to talk about? Johnson keeps saying that they have to get rid of the Irish backstop. That's the insurance policy that will guarantee that there will be no hard border in Ireland. Johnson says that there are alternatives to that, but he only speaks in generalities. He never says specifically what those alternatives are.
Yeah, and for folks out there who are not familiar with that, anytime you talk about a border with Ireland, it is a very emotional issue. Now, in terms of suspending Parliament, some are actually calling it a brilliant move, in essence, saying that it is going to give British lawmakers less time to debate the issue and therefore less time to really haggle and put more problems out there.
It seems to be what Johnson's hoping for. He thinks that, or he's taking a gamble really, he thinks that he can cut down the time that Parliament can prevent him from having a no-deal Brexit on the table. He can then go to the EU and say, I'll crash out if you don't make changes to the withdrawal agreement. But the problem there is that, as I say, they've already said they won't make any changes. And that will give Parliament very little time to do anything other than to go along with what he wants. They can have a vote of no confidence, but that would mean putting Jeremy Corbyn in as Prime Minister, the Labour Party leader. The problem there is that Corbyn is wildly unpopular, especially with Conservatives, but even with some members of his own Labour Party. So they don't want to do that either. Johnson thinks that he can then call a general election, snap general election, and if he does that, he can go to the country on a platform of the people versus Parliament, win a victory, and before the economic effects of Brexit take effect, he can get a majority and he's in for another 5 years.
In the story leading up from London, we heard our reporter say that this is uncharted territory, and I think a lot of people do agree with that. Let's talk about what the no-deal Brexit would mean. And for folks out there whose eyes are glazing over, explain what no deal does mean.
What no deal means is that on the 31st of October at midnight, the UK will lose every diplomatic, political, and economic advantage it's had for the last 45 years of being in the European Union. It will be completely on its own. Now, the Brexiteers say that that gives the UK the opportunity to chart its own course. The problem there is that nobody knows what's going to happen on November 1st. And so it could mean that the UK will face food shortages, shortages in medicine. There'll be backups at the borders, the ports. But perhaps most dangerously, it could lead to renewal violence in Ireland.
Yeah, no one, obviously that is one of the keys here. But what are the chances of Johnson getting a deal at this point? Because Theresa May clearly had no success.
Well, the Brexiteers say that the EU is ready to talk, but I think they're misreading the signals from Johnson's recent visits to Berlin and Paris and his talks at the G7. They're willing to give some ground on a non-binding political document, but they're not willing to change the withdrawal agreement. They say that that's closed. And so I think Johnson has found himself boxed in by his own rhetoric and by his own actions the last 3 years. Johnson told everyone that this was going to be the easiest thing in the world, that they could have their cake and eat it. And what they're finding is that Brexit is nothing of the sort.
And also, I think looking at once this has happened, once November 1 comes around, there are going to be legal challenges, wouldn't you say?
Well, there are right now. There's legal in 3 separate courts in Ireland and England to him proroguing Parliament. Those will likely go to the UK Supreme Court, but whether or not that will stop him is anybody's guess. The problem is he's really got himself down to a tight timetable, because if he can prorogue Parliament until the 14th of October, that means there will be a Queen's speech on his domestic agenda, which nobody really cares about right now. Brexit is the issue. He will then go to the EU Council for their meeting on the 17th. If they agree to his changes, he will then bring that new deal back to Parliament. They'll have all of 2 days, 21st and 22nd of October, to negotiate, or to pass the deal, and then they're home and clear, free and clear. But that's very doubtful. So he's taken a huge gamble.
Kevin, we don't have a lot of time. Give me your best hypothesis for where the UK goes.
Right now, it seems to me that the UK is going to crash out of the EU on the 31st. I think that is going to have ramifications for everyone, not just for the UK, not just for the EU, but for the world.
And economically,
Economically, I think it will eventually it will lead to a lower standard of living in the UK and more immediately a recession.
Well, Kevin Matthews, as always, thanks. Pleasure.